Public hearing item for the night, which is the family-friendly residential section of the design guidelines. Can we have the staff report, please?
Good evening, Chair Moss and Commissioners. My name is Catherine Furbo. I'm a housing coordinator with the Community Development Department. Sorry, let me get this up. And where am I? I always have trouble with this. Where's view? View. There we go. Why do I always have trouble with this? Nope. Right. Where? Here?
There. Whoops. One over. There.
Sorry. I always have trouble with this. We're here to discuss the amendment of the Emeryville design guidelines, including the residential section, and to create a new section on family-friendly housing design. I'm going to present the background information, and Diana Kina will discuss the guidelines. Our consultant, Arnold Mamarella, will discuss the unit designs, and then Diana will come back up and talk about the next steps. Currently, the family-friendly design is in the residential design section of the design guidelines, and it has one subsection, J22, that applies only to projects that are seeking bonus points for family-friendly housing, and staff is proposing a new, more detailed section. We are also proposing some additions to the existing residential design sections that will apply to all residential developments, regardless of whether they're seeking bonuses or not. Currently, the family-friendly design, The changes that we are proposing are about making clear what design features Emeryville would consider that makes residential projects and units family-friendly. Not how these guidelines will be used or how the guidelines might affect affordability, but the actual, just the design features that we think make the project and the units family-friendly. That being said, I do actually want to talk a little bit about affordability because it gets talked about a great deal when we talk about the design guidelines. So first, I want to talk about 100% affordable units. With 100% affordable units, the city has a whole process that they use to set the program for the affordable project before we even identify a developer. Then a developer is identified, and it's a team process throughout the rest of the project development and getting the entitlements, and the idea is that we work together to meet the goals of getting the project built, but also to meet those program goals that we had in the onset. And we work together depending on what funding is availability to adjust whatever the program is, which we did quite effectively on 3706 San Pablo. The second is that when we develop affordable units, particularly, we're looking for outcomes for the tenants for a long term, over 5 decades, 55 years of affordability. So when we talk about the design of those units, we're really talking about the outcome for the people who live, the general outcomes for the people who live in those units. Multifamily housing is a long-term investment, and you know, a lot of the market rate multifamily units that are being developed right now will not be redeveloped in in any time frame that we can imagine in our lifetimes. But it's very difficult to remodel multifamily housing. Unlike single-family homes, where you can say, well, I want to add a bathroom, or I want to push this wall and make this bigger or make that smaller. It's really not an option in multifamily housing. And so as a city, we need to make sure that we have the best designs with the most flexibility so that if there is a demand change for family-friendly market rate housing, that the outcomes of those tenants have been considered in the design of the units. This is why we're here, why we're talking about this in such detail. And the third is that there's a lot of talk about affordability and the family-friendly guidelines, but I just want to make the point that for-profit developers charge the rents that the market will bear. They don't sort of think, well, this unit's for families and I'll charge this, you know, either more or less. They simply charge what the market will bear, and they try and maximize their profit. We are here today to sort of just discuss what we want to see as a community out of this process. On May 2nd, there's as Maru mentioned, there's a special Joint Planning Commission and City Council meeting, and we'll discuss the affordability, the unit mix, tenure, and how we use the bonus system to address all the goals within the city, of which family-friendly is one of the goals. Today we're discussing, as I said, design. Emeryville adopted design guidelines in 2010. In 2011, the relationship between the needs of family and children in schools and the housing that was available was discussed, and we had MIG create a report on family housing design. In 2012, EDH developed a report on family success in affordable housing, and that included sections on neighborhood, project, and unit design. We used that report to develop a checklist for the 3706 San Pablo Family Housing RFP. And that process was a huge success. Many of the proposals that were given, not just the EH one that you all saw, but we actually got 9 proposals, and many of them had very interesting responses to that checklist, and we learned a great deal through that process. And actually, we've adapted some of the EH during the entitlement process. We went back and we looked at EH's design, and we sort of adapted it and found kind of the best things that that could make that project work better. And that's what I mean by that whole collaborative process that we use to get the best affordable housing project that we can. The city decided that the current subsection in the residential design guidelines needed to incorporate the lessons that we learned from that process, and to make it clearer what we were looking for in family-friendly market rents units. Out of this process came some points that would make all residential projects stronger, not just the projects that we're talking about, their family-friendly units. So there is actually some changes, as I mentioned, to the residential guidelines that will affect all projects, not just projects that are talking about family-friendly. And then in 2013, the city adopted planning regulations that included bonuses for family-friendly units, which is one of the reasons why we need to have a more detailed description of what we mean by family-friendly. The process has been going on for quite some time, as I mentioned. So in June of 2013, we came to the Planning Commission for a hearing. And if you'll recall, there was some comments, and we were asked to go back and have some architects look at the designs that we had brought forward, the design guidelines that we brought forward. So that actually, there was a specific architect at HUD that we were trying to get to comment. We weren't very successful. He had some issues making those comments internally. So we actually put it out to a bunch of affordable housing architects, and we got comments back on the draft, which we actually added their comments into the draft. And then in March in 2014, as part of our housing element process, we actually had affordable housing developers roundtable where we discussed the family-friendly housing, and it was very positively reviewed, and they were actually made comments about how our RFP process brought up some issues that they hadn't thought of before, and that they were going to incorporate in all their projects, not just those in Emeryville. So it was, it's been pretty successful so far. We hired a architect who's here tonight to work with us, make comments on the draft and to illustrate the guidelines. We brought it back here in February, and the hearing has been continued, so we're here today to finish that. We also took it to the Housing Committee after we took it to the Planning Commission, and we got their comments. Their comments were almost very similar to what the Planning Commission had, and they had a couple more that were incorporated into the draft. So today we'd like to consider adopting these guidelines, and then on May 19th, if we adopt them tonight, they'll go to council final adoption. I do want to make a couple, there's a couple slides here about families in Emeryville. In absolute numbers, the families in Emeryville have been increasing as the housing units have been increasing in Emeryville. But in addition, the percentage of family households has also been increasing in Emeryville. And with that, Diana's going to come and talk about the process.
Catherine, do you have figures for the county? How we compare with the county in terms of?
So you will see that on May 2nd. When you see that, you'll get the staff report. There's actually a great deal of detail on comparisons to other jurisdictions and the county, and I think even the state, right? It has some information. So you'll have a lot of data.
Okay.
Set aside some time to read that staff report.
Yeah.
So this is what happened. We came to you in February. You told us that the design guidelines should have balance and flexibility and show options. And you made some specific comments. Don't say kitchens should be on the interior wall. They might not always want to be. Minimum unit sizes should be flexible so they don't impede affordable housing development. Don't say distinct living and dining rooms. Show a great room and a room with walls in examples both ways, and just say that there should be enough space for the dining table. And so we did a little more than that. Specify that enclosed entry foyers are only recommended where units are entered from interior corridors. Don't require a balcony, deck, or patio for each unit because the planning regulations allow developers to trade that for common open space, and that might be better in some cases. And where we talk about shallow uses, shallow units, we should say where feasible and show an example of a good deeper unit. So we've responded to all that. You'll see in a minute. And tying all this into bonuses, affordability, unit mix, and ownership, that's going to be addressed on May 2nd. That's where we talk about how to use these guidelines. Today we talk about what they should say. So here's what we've done in response to your comments and those of the Housing Committee. In the residential section, the section that applies to all residential development, we've only made 2 changes. We added text that in long corridors we should define the entries and break up the walls using lighting and articulation of walls and ceilings. And we deleted that unit daylight and aspect diagram because it just seemed to be too confusing, too much. And in the family-friendly residential section, the section that currently only applies to people who want a bonus, that's where most of your comments were. We deleted the requirement for distinct living, dining, and kitchen areas. And we have an example with a kitchen at the window. And the guidelines for dining and living areas specify dining room space for a table and everyone around it in circulation, and living room space for seating for all in circulation. So it doesn't say anything about separation. We deleted the requirement for a balcony, deck, or patio, and we have a diagram of a unit that doesn't have one. We improved the language of the laundry guidelines so it's a little more general instead of just listing examples of where the laundry could be. And we have an example unit that doesn't have laundry in the unit. And instead of having a foyer requirement, we just said let's have the front door enter into a transitional space rather than in the middle of the kitchen or something. And one thing that wasn't in the units, and this came from the Housing Committee, was that we should say play areas should be ample and have a variety of equipment, because we have a history of some that didn't. And we took out the square footage. We figured that if we need to specify anything about square footage, that could happen in the regulations. Numbers like that are generally best off in regulations. And now we'd like to have Arnold Mamarella come up and walk you through the diagrams.
Diana, could you just go into a little bit explaining the way the guidelines work as opposed to the regulations, and where they get enforced and how they get...
Excuse me?
Just wondering about the process of regulations versus the guidelines, just for clarification.
What's the difference in how we use them? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, yes, very good point. The guidelines are code. They're legislation. And to do exceptions is a big process. The purpose of that's what, did I say guidelines? That's what the regulations are. The regulations are in the Emeryville Code, and you have to follow them or get an exception in a very formal process. The purpose of guidelines is to help people know what we want to see in design, and you do have to follow the spirit of them, and if you don't follow the letter of them, we do question And we want to say, well, what's your justification for not following it? But it's not as formal as if you don't want to follow a regulation. How's that?
Yeah, I understood that part. I'm thinking more of things like the guidelines that say have adequate ventilation and things like that. How that comes, that's not something we generally are looking at up here.
There are some things in the guidelines that I remember the planner saying, how am I going to do that? We can do it in conditions of approval.
Okay.
That particular point is one that one of the architects brought up.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Mamarello.
Hello and good evening. What I would like to do is talk through the changes in the diagrams that come with the guidelines tonight, and to kind of give you a sense of the process that we went through since your last meeting in coming up with these changes. This first set of diagrams is part of that, in the last go-around, we didn't really have some of the issues graphically represented in terms of family-friendly design, in terms of units that are being built, or units that have been planned, and whether those achieve some of the family-friendly objectives that are laid out in the written text. So we went back, and one of the things we did is we started with illustrating some of those conditions and finding out where they did and did not meet the guidelines that are in the writing. So what I'd like to do tonight is go through that first, and then go on to the examples that you've seen that have changed since last time of different unit configurations. And of course, you know, there's so many ways to configure units that we don't want to imply that those are the only ways to do it, but there are examples of things that respond to the points in the guidelines, the written points of what family-friendly would look like. So on this page of the guidelines, the purpose is to kind of illustrate some things that are happening and what things are not meeting the written language and what's really going on here. So mainly what you see is that living areas have become very sort of kind of constrained in multifamily housing units. And for example, the 2-bedroom, 2-bath dual master flat that you see, you notice that the living area has the living and the dining area. The dining table has been placed in that area, and you notice that there's not adequate room for both functions and circulation around that. And so you really have, like what says A/B, it's because the living and dining are put together, but there's really only room for one of those functions. So that's really the main thing, is more area has been put into bedrooms and other rooms out of the total unit square footage. And as a result of that, you're getting small areas for living. Now when we get to the bigger unit, like the undesirable example for a 3-bedroom, we'll come back and show that, comparing that to one of the ones that we put for desirable units. But you'll also notice that the living and dining areas are very tight, and that there's insufficient area for the number of people who live in the unit. So as we went through this process, we looked at the number of bedrooms in these units and how many people that would result in, perhaps, and then we sort of said, well, we need this much furniture. And that really drove a lot of this, along with some of the other issues of how to organize units to be family friendly. A couple things happen in these units to point out. I know you can look at the diagrams and read them. Sometimes you get awkward circulation patterns and things like that in units, and as a result of that, you're getting circulating from bedrooms back through kitchens to get to bathrooms, or just circulation cutting across spaces and making it difficult to furnish those spaces. When people furnish a unit, I mean, they're not interior designers, so they have to come at it from a point of view of what they know to do, and they're going to work with it the best they can, of course. But in looking at some of these units, they become very difficult to furnish, and there's very few options and very little area for putting in the adequate furniture. So what you're seeing is configuration issues coming up, as well as just the size of the living areas being very, very restricted. And then the entry areas not having enough space for strollers, not having enough storage space, things of that nature. Lastly, to point out on these locations of decks where they do occur, they're often been put in front of a bedroom, and it's off to the side of the living room. So they're not really an extension of the living room, but they're more off to the side. So that wasn't seen as a really good kind of physical arrangement of those spaces. So there's a whole list of things here that in examples are conflicting with the written guidelines. And no play study areas, not a lot of flexible areas, things of that nature. So we just wanted to sort of put that in there so that that can be looked at as we look at using the guidelines with the other examples. So I'm going to move on to the other examples. How do I do this?
Can you speak a little louder, please?
Okay. Sure. So I'm going to move on to the other examples. So we have two sets of diagrams. We have the one-level diagrams and we have the two-level diagrams. One of the big things we heard is to get more diversity in the unit types. We also heard public comments about unit configurations and how practical they were. So we went back and modified the units. On the single-level units, we kept example A fairly similar to what it was. A couple of very minor adjustments. This is a two-bedroom unit with the kind of a projecting bay element that you see, and it incorporates all the ideas that we would want to see in a family-friendly unit. We have a corridor for kids to run in. We have a study area. We have a space for dining, a space for living, terrace, and an entry off a corridor that is somewhat sheltered and not into the kitchen. We have all those elements in about 1,100 square feet. As you travel down to example B, that is a new unit. One of the issues that came up is trying to get a deeper configuration to a two-bedroom unit. And in this case, we did make it deeper and tried to keep it pretty similar in square footage, but make it still function. It did end up being a little larger. We wanted to try to get all the elements, and we wanted to get some diversity. So you'll see in this unit, most of the elements are there. The deck has been moved to between the children's and parents' bedroom rather than just in front of the child's bedroom. And since it's a deep unit, there's always a concern of getting light in. So we tried to look at it from a building configuration point and saying, well, maybe that next unit should be notched back or stepped a little more light into the deeper unit. So those were some of the considerations, along with getting all of the furniture into the unit. And the total square footage ended up being a little bit more, but kind of in the ballpark, because we're always trying to not add too much square footage. The C and the D examples are the three-bedroom examples. Now those were wider and shallower before, so we tried to really narrow them so they weren't as wide, and to still make them functional. We also had comments about not always having the kitchen on the interior side of the unit. And in our discussions, we said, well, that really makes a lot of sense, especially at the ground floor units often, where, especially if you're on a courtyard or into some area where children might be playing, to have the kitchen maybe looking back into the space. But on an upper floor, it becomes much more challenging. So what we did was we kept the kitchen against the service wall, but we reconfigured the unit so that we had a fairly ample area for the kitchen to look into the dining room and then look into the living room, but still keep the living room large enough that it would function for the number of people that you would have in that unit. And so in example C, what you'll see is the kitchen is sort of looking out towards both the dining and the living area. It's open to both. But there is still a clear place to put the dining room table without it interfering in the circulation or in the living room furniture. And also popping out a little bay or something like that with the deck, so that you can have like a little extra area for some sort of flexible use. What you notice is the bedrooms become a little bit smaller perhaps in some of the secondary bedrooms, but they're still kind of wide enough to function. If they function, you can put a bed and put a table or dresser across from the bed on the opposite wall. The D example, we wanted to get diversity, and this was a place where we thought we could do the kitchen looking out to the public space on like a unit that was on the podium level or on facing a courtyard or something like that, or at a building end. So this works best at a end unit or corner unit because it's really difficult to do without making the unit very, very wide to get the kitchen facing forward on a kind of an inline unit. And so in this case, it was a corner unit, and we added the idea of putting in the eat-in kitchen. So there was comments last time about, you know, how single-family houses work and some of the features that make them kind of friendly to families. So we tried to pull some of those ideas into this, where the kitchen looked out onto the living area, but the dining room table was actually in the kitchen, and that looked out onto a patio, still making sure there's adequate space, and we had an exterior entry. We did keep the interior entries because the developers seem to prefer those on these larger buildings. So this essentially has two entry points, interior and then an exterior for visitors. And it may be the building configuration will affect that a lot. This one also has a study area. One of the big concerns was children, when they're small, have certain set of needs. Children, when they get larger, have other sets of needs. And we tried to be aware of that and start to think like, well, how would that play out over time? And consider unit layouts that didn't force people to move from one unit to another because their kids are now going from little toddlers to getting a little older. And trying to look for ways to incorporate some ideas for study and things like that in units that allow that to happen, so people aren't shifting units and possibly moving out of the city. So this example is trying to create some more diversity and to look at the ground floor unit. So I'm going to move on to the next one. The two-level units, we showed three two-level units. We had three before, but these are, one's the same. Example G, you've seen that before. Example F is a revision on one, and example E is a new one. So one of the things with the diversity we're trying to do is bring in more options for units. Townhomes, two-level units, people seem to like those. They get the bedrooms on the upper level. We're seeing in larger buildings this example of E, which shows essentially a townhouse that's put into the front of the building. It's kind of embedded into the front of the building. You've seen that before on recent projects. We're using one of those projects, the sort of the dimensions as the basis for this one. And what we're doing is we're just showing how that two-bedroom unit would look on a street level or on a pedestrian view, where you have ample space for living and dining, and where it's sort of, there's an identifiable place to put things, and the entry has some definition, but it's open also. And then the bedrooms, of course, are upstairs on that. So it's pretty straightforward, but just getting all the functions to work in that type of shape, which is a little bit of a different shape because it's a square shape. The example F is a little bit of a different story here, so I'll try to explain what the thinking was. Another example of diversity. We took a unit that could go on an upper level but still be a two-level unit. So it's corridor access on an upper level. In this case, we moved the balcony, so we'd have options without balconies. But instead of just leaving the balcony off, we replaced it with sort of a small room. You can call it a bonus room, a playroom, a flex room, an office, home office, whatever it may be. That's the G, and it's off of the foyer coming in. So this unit has requirement to have a half bath, accessible half bath on this unit on the lower level. That's been put in there. Storage area, and having this kind of flex room that could kind of move over time into different units as the family grows and changes. And then the living and dining and kitchen are also relating to each other, they're visible to each other, and then the bedrooms are upstairs, and the laundry's upstairs. So it functions in a way that is both similar to many of the other units, but also with a slight difference in having this kind of zone at the entry and the office space, which could be a little bit different style of unit. Lastly, the example G is a townhome that is entered from the public way. It does not have elevator, it's not for off of elevator access. You could stack another unit above this and have elevator access to the units above that, have like stacked townhomes. This one is different in that you have a typical townhouse arrangement where you have essentially the walls at the front and the back have windows. So it's much more like the row house example. And this one is a little bit bigger unit. It's 4 bedrooms, and it does have some division between the living and the dining. This is the only one I think has more of a solid wall between the living room and the dining room, because the kitchen is between those two rooms. Other than that, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and you've seen it before. So just to go to the one last slide I'm going to show you. So this brings us back to a comparison between this 2-3 bedroom flats. These would probably be the most common units for family friendly, the 2 and 3 bedrooms in the one side exposure, single aspect or inline unit. And when you put them side by side, what stands out is they're about the same size, but the amount of living area is much larger on the desirable example than on the what we consider the undesirable example. So there's more room for living and dining and kitchen. Kitchen's bigger, there's an island. Dining has space, there's space for circulation, there's ample space for furniture. And the unit lays out a little more efficiently just because of the proportions of the unit. And probably that's a good place to stop unless there's questions.
Then I can continue.
Okay.
Oops.
Before you start,
About that one?
no, it doesn't matter. In all the units,
Can you use the mic?
oh, sorry. In all the units, the requirements for accessible design have been considered in all the units. Okay.
Thank you. See if I can do this right now. Okay. So there's one little quirk here you have to do in order to adopt the design guidelines. We have to amend the planning regulations, because in the bonus table it says in order to be eligible for a bonus for family-friendly units, you have to have in-unit laundries. And as we actually, the thought came up when we were doing our tour of the good affordable projects. A lot of the developers said they really like having the communal laundries, not only because it saves on cost, but also because it creates a social space. So we wanted to have that option and not rule it out. So in order to make the regulations consistent with the new guidelines, we need to amend the regulations. So that's what that's about. And that's in your resolution. So next steps, to repeat, we will take this to the City Council on May 19th. The new family-friendly section, which applies to people seeking bonus points, and additions to the residential section, which applies to all residential development, and initiate the amendment to the planning regulations. And on May 2nd, we'll have the joint City Council Planning Commission meeting to talk about multi-unit residential development regulations and incentives about affordable units, unit mix, ownership, and do we want to redo the bonus system. And that's where we'll talk about how to use these design guidelines, how to apply them. So that completes our presentation, and we will all three be happy to answer any questions. And we have a few other slides in case you ask questions about what the earlier drafts were or things like that.
I have two questions. If would these guidelines, would the council consider these guidelines if it didn't require a change to the planning regulations as well, or
Yes.
is that the primary?
Yes.
Okay. And then so I would imagine that if we were to then recommend approval of these guidelines, that these are on a schedule. I think it was what, May 19th to go to the city council, so that these are on a schedule so that a lot of the current projects which we would be considering, fairly soon would then be evaluated under these guidelines, which is and not necessarily under some of the some of the ordinances or regulations that might come as a result of our May 2nd joint meeting. Is that?
Yes, this is on a faster track if all goes as planned. We'll be, if it goes to the council on May 19th, then actually the design guidelines are adopted by resolution. So they'll go and they don't have to have a second reading. Yeah.
I have some questions for you. So can you go back to the previous slide, page 15?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my understanding is on our meeting on May 2nd, we need to go back one more. There you go. We're not only just talking about these 5 items, but the items that we're discussing tonight are also going to be discussed. Is that not correct?
The planning director is attempting to focus the discussion on those items because, as you can see, discussing the design guidelines could take a whole other several hours. So if we can get the content of the design guidelines, which have a lot of details hammered out here, then we won't have to spend time on them at that meeting. There's plenty of other things to talk about. We will be talking about how to use these, how to apply these with the bonus system or with the unit mix or regulations or incentives or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So generally what we're discussing tonight and passing by resolution won't be discussed at the council and commission joint meeting?
Probably not in great detail.
Okay, because I felt tonight that what we were doing was putting the cart before the horse, that if we were going to have this, we're having a 4-hour meeting with council, and if we're going to discuss this, but yet we've already passed a resolution, it didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, what the Planning Commission is doing, what we're asking the Planning Commission to do is to recommend council adoption of this, and the May 2nd meeting will happen before the May 19th council meeting.
All right. And so at that meeting, may we not finesse this or have the opportunity to finesse what we're doing tonight and get, a broader consensus?
If people have something to say about it, it can be discussed then.
It can, since we
Worried
passed.
that people are going to have big changes in light of the things they're discussing on May 2nd?
I think it's possible. Well, in reality, it's probably not possible, but I think that the discussion should be had to a larger audience. To me, so if we pass this resolution tonight and we talk about it at the May 2nd meeting and there are some things that are agreed to be changed, do we have to start the process over again and go back and rewrite the resolution and pass it again?
No.
The city council.
Because you'll be at that meeting.
What?
You can say anything you want at that meeting.
Right, so if something comes out of that meeting that changes the language in the resolution that we passed tonight.
Well, the resolution just refers to the guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes to council. I mean, a lot of times something happens in between the planning commission meeting and the council meeting,
Right.
and then the council adopts the final thing.
And between the 2nd and the 19th, the final draft can be changed or modified.
Could be.
Yeah, okay. Because that's what I was afraid we were going to make something and then set something in motion, then change it on the 2nd, and then have to go back and start this process again.
Feel the need to change it on May 2nd, you can.
Okay.
I noticed that the Housing Committee, one of their comments was tying the universal design to the family-friendly design guidelines. And
Yes.
I didn't see anything in.
That is because the building code requires all units that have accessed by a flat floor, a level floor, or an elevator to have adaptable design. So we felt like the building code addresses that.
Okay.
Are there any other questions, staff?
Public comment?
All right, yeah. So thank you, Diana, and Catherine, and Arnold. And with that, we will go ahead and open the public comment on this item, or the public hearing, rather. So if anyone would like to speak on this item, please come forward, and you'll be given 3 minutes.
Would like to speak on it? Overhead projector working, please.
Oh, I can do it. Yep.
Good. Bear with me for a moment. Got a big shadow across it. I guess that's what we got. Is there any way to zoom in on these diagrams? Oh, and then can we get... Oh, the other way. That's better. Oh, I got it. Okay. Oops. Sorry. Okay. Oh, wouldn't you know it? I have my notes on. Okay, all right. Okay, I apologize. So I'll have to go back. All right, I have a couple quick points here. We need to testability. We need to find out about the metrics of this. And I asked somebody, I believe it was Ms. Furpo several months ago, about how do we know how we're doing vis-a-vis family-friendly housing. So we're building it. Are families actually moving in, or are they just students renting out each room to other students? That's common. So insofar that we can test to see how we've been doing, we should be doing that. I think you should be asking that. And I never have gotten a straight answer on how we can measure. I've been told the only information that we can get and use is U.S. Census information. And then I've also been told that we can, in fact, talk to developers about not names necessarily of who's renting apartments, if they are apartments, or buying apartments, but if we can ask if they are being inhabited by actual families. So I don't know if you've done any work in that regard, but we should start doing that. In other words, get some data so that we can find out how well we've been doing. Testability, metrics. Okay, another thing is this whole thing, not talking about the big 800-pound gorilla, is the fact that what we keep building in Emeryville are drive-in, drive-out podium apartments and condos, and those are just decidedly unfamily friendly. They're essentially gated communities in the sky, and as such, podium development. It's auto-centric. It kind of turns us back onto the public realm. And so if we want to build families with little sociopath children, that would be the way to do it. Now, if you don't want to have sociopathic children being raised, you don't make gated communities. Instead, you do a different urban model, like, say, for instance, New York, Brooklyn. There, they don't have drive-in, drive-out. They have, brownstones, and people don't have to drive cars there. But we could have put garages around Emeryville, so people that want to use cars could park in a garage and then walk a couple blocks till they get to their home. But that's what you want to do. You want to have it not be drive-in, drive-out, so we have this alienating kind of architecture. And this plan here doesn't address that at all. It just assumes that we should continue building drive-in, drive-out apartments, and that we can deliver healthy families that way. And I posit no. I think we should look to places that have done it. For instance, New York, and that's the model we should adopt. So now let me put this here. Okay. Is that my time?
That's done.
Okay. Can I ask if somebody will cede their time to me?
Once everyone speaks, we might invite you back up.
Thank you.
Vicki Sewell again. I agree with Brian. I don't know why we don't interview or take a poll of the people at Ambassador Laundry. and ask them how they like their apartments and what works. I know they like their apartments, but there's flaws, and they live there, and they have families, Brian. Lots and lots of kids across the board, and they all go to Anna Yates. They all go to school here. We could talk to them. I think they'd love to talk to us, and the next building we build could be better.
Any other speakers?
Sorry. I just have a quick question about how they decide that they are wheelchair accessible. Because like my unit is a disabled unit, but like I said, there are definite flaws for a wheelchair getting around in my unit. And one of the real issues is carpeting, the wall in the odd spot. Like my bedroom door goes, like when you come in, you have to go immediately into one of my bedroom doors. And the way the door opens, it doesn't function. And so I have to like go all the way into my house, turn around, and then come back in. In my dining room area that's supposed to be a dining room, if I put my dining room there, I can't get my wheelchair through. And I can't really fit my wheelchair into my bedroom very well because the door space isn't big enough, the turning radius, and with the bed and a nightstand. So I'm just trying to figure out how they're deciding that they're wheelchair accessible, if they have people in wheelchairs helping them with the design, and following a wheelchair person around to see the easiest way for them to go around. That's a huge issue, being that I'm in a wheelchair. And I found that problem in a lot of the disabled units. Thanks.
Are there any other speakers?
This gentleman said he would be willing to see this to me.
If you can keep it brief, we'll give you another 2 minutes.
2 minutes, thank you. That's fair. Does this work?
Seems like it.
Is it working? Yes. Okay. Notice here, here are 3 undesirable units. And what you'll note is that the bedrooms tend to open onto the live space. The bedrooms go directly onto the live space. Here's one where it doesn't. That has a hallway, so that's different. But generally, as you go through these plans, you'll find that the undesirable units have that one characteristic, whereas the desirable units, none of them, it's preferable to have the bedrooms open onto the live space for a family-friendly unit. So I want everybody to pay this close attention, because the next item we're going to be talking about here tonight is going to be the public, I guess it's called the marketplace development, and you're going to see typical unit plans that do not comport with this. So I just want to make everybody aware that what's going on here, and then later on as we look at that development, to bear that in mind. Thank you very much.
All right, last call for any other speakers. All right, great. We'll close the public hearing, and we will bring this back for discussion. Who wants to start? Brad, you want to start?
Oh, sure. Great job, you guys. Great to see all the work that's been put into this. Actually, my comments primarily were related to pre-existing items in the just general residential category. And most of them are pretty small, but the portion J29 about corridors serving 6 units or more, define entries and break up walls by using lighting and articulation of walls and ceilings. It'd also be nice to see something in there related to creating gathering spaces in long corridors to break them up, possible seating, and sort of a bulb out where families, kids can gather as they're moving through the corridor, a place to sit, tie shoes, etc. there were some things in here that I don't know exactly how they apply. J34, talking about vaulted ceilings, arches. Wasn't sure exactly what that had to do with anything, but let's see here. The J35, in this discussion of foyers, depending on where you're from, I still not certain that that's, I know the language got watered down a little bit in the family-friendly portion, but still not certain that that's the most important aspect. If a door opens directly into a great room, and there's a closet nearby or something like that, it can work just as well. J37's mention of a pantry, I mean, a lot of smaller units, a pantry just takes up extra space. If there's enough cabinetry, it can serve the same purpose as a pantry, and that space might be utilized better elsewhere. And then I think it would be nice to see something, whether it's in the guidelines or the regulations, that gets to the heart of the overall building and the way that it functions. And there is stuff in here that does touch on the visual connection of units to courtyards, etc. But a lot of times what we see are that the units are entered from corridors that wrap around the courtyard that don't have any visual connection to the courtyard itself. So you might have a double-loaded corridor with units on one side facing a courtyard and the other side facing the exterior, outside streets, and you could walk on that corridor for half the building before you get to a place that even has a visual connection at all to the corridor, and that's generally the place where you get to the corridor. Or sorry, to the courtyard, and that's generally the place where you enter the courtyard. And so I'd like to see more connections between primary paths of travel to the courtyards, and also thinking of that in not just horizontally but vertically. I know we've seen some projects where if you're looking out to onto a courtyard from your unit and you want to get to that courtyard, you have to sort of go outside, go to the corridor, go down the corridor, go down an elevator, then go back down another corridor to get out, and really thinking in those terms of how to have the most direct connection, not just visually but physically, to courtyards, for the ability to supervise your children, for children to get there in a safe manner, and then it is something that I'd like to see us discuss more related to the comments about New York City, or some of the things that we saw where I think one of the diagrams shows a double-sided townhouse where one side faces the street but the other side faces presumably a corridor that connects to the parking. I'd like to, the more that you get out of your car, go straight into an elevator, go right to a double-loaded corridor and get into your unit, the more likely you are to be living an anonymous life in that building where you don't know others don't know you, no one's looking out for you or your children. And so really keeping in mind how you get into the building, how you move through the building. Are we putting too much emphasis on efficiency of getting in with your car, getting your groceries into your unit, and not enough emphasis on creating a community that's going to nurture and reinforce a family-friendly lifestyle? Those are my comments.
Well, I appreciate those comments about the overall structure of the building and the way that people interact within the building and the paths of travel and the accessibility to the open spaces. I think that needs to be, some kind of guidance needs to be added into the guidelines on those areas. Other than that, I think that for the most part that these cover a lot of really important points and are going to be very useful and going to be very helpful in letting developers know what we're looking for. And certainly this, the diagrams showing the undesirable units are what most of the 2-unit apartments are in both of the projects that are coming before us, and I recognize that. I think that in terms of the foyer and the pantry pieces, just talking about transition spaces or a little bit more flexibility in those would be useful. But other than that, thank you very, very much for a job well done here.
Well, I think it's amazing all that you've been able to incorporate in this. On J36, I think that all kitchens should have exhaust fans automatically, not just cross-ventilated windows. You know, I think it is important to show furniture in the plans. Other than that, I think it's not bad.
That was quick. Well, I have quite a few thoughts on this. First of all, I do recognize that there was a lot of thought and work that went into this process for a lot of people, and I want to thank and appreciate all the work that was done for this. I'm beginning to this date, no one has yet told me how we guarantee families are going to get these units. We're putting in a lot of regulations to make these things family friendly, but we still don't have a way to get families into these units. And primarily that gets to the affordability component of this. We can require developers make these most glorious places that are just grand for anyone to live in. But my thought is that our Christmas list of Santa Claus is getting bigger than his sleigh can carry. I think basically what we should be doing, and the reason I really would rather have this discussion with council, because they're the ones driving this, they're the ones wanting this, and I would really like to have a more open dialogue with council before we go passing a resolution like this. But I just think what we should do is limit what we're demanding of developers, because everything we require a developer to do adds to the cost. You can't add all these wonderful amenities and expect the house to be affordable unless you've got a lot of subsidies for them. So I just don't know how realistic this is going to be. So I think if we could limit what we really want, that really make these houses agreeable and usable to families, we'd be more successful at getting those things. But for me, I'm still concerned that our city itself is not drawing families. Our schools are a problem, and the evidence I've gathered myself, people don't even look at our city, let alone our housing stock, before considering to move here, because they don't think our schools are good enough. They don't think there's a place for their children to play. They don't think that the city is secure enough or has the financial stability to maintain security. Those are things we can directly control. We cannot control who gets a house. That's illegal. Anyone that wants a house can get any type of house. And my own research, I've gone to the 3 developments that have opened with 3-bedroom units. Less than half in each of those units are with families. One of them has no families in their 3-bedroom units. So the evidence I've been able to collect shows me that building these units, though it is important and that's what we need to draw families, if these units aren't affordable, we're going to draw the people that are going to Cal who can afford to split up the room with roommates and etc. So I think if we increase the incentives for building the 3-bedroom units and we make them more affordable, and during our discussion with council, I'm going to share with everybody there, the Legislative Analyst's Office has just produced a 80-page plus report on why is housing in California so expensive. So this is an issue that's not Emeryville's issue. This is a statewide issue. And if we don't address that, making the developers build these lavish units are not going to make them family friendly. They're going to be desirable to families, but no one's going to be able to get into them. Right now, I've checked with Emmy Apartments, and I've gone in and talked to the leasing agent at Park on Powell. Their 3-bedroom units are $4,100 a month. A family would have to make over $140,000 a year to qualify for that. And if that family has that kind of income, they're going to go live in Orinda, or they're going to send their kids to private schools. So the bottom line is, if we can't make these things affordable and we keep asking the developers to do this and make these things more expensive, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. So this is why I would rather not vote on this tonight. I would rather have a long dialogue with council on how we address the bigger issues. The elephant in the room is affordability. It's not what we're building. I have lots of families in Pacific Park Plaza. We have one entry and one exit to the building. I've watched children grow up from preschool up to adulthood, and I'm in a high-rise, so people do live in two-bedroom units with families, and they make it work because they want to live here because of Emeryville, because it's proximity to jobs, to a recreation area, whatever it is. Those are the things we can control, and those are the things we need to pay attention to. Let's make more three-bedroom units. I think we're starting to see that, and more families are coming. The evidence on what we were presented tonight show every year we're getting more families. So we're doing something right. And I think we need to continue that, but we need to make it realistic. And, you know, I think there are 4 or 5 things we could pull out of this thing that say, developers, you have to provide this. This is really what we need. But to make this whole laundry list, and if we could go back, I don't think we need to go back to the pictures, but they show the picture of the balconies that are undesirable, that are off a bedroom, but there's a door that accesses it off the living room. So if the living room can open up to the balcony and you can put a barbecue out there, to me, that's a functional balcony, even though the major frontage of it is just off of a bedroom. But you can still use it off of a living room. So I think we start nitpicking and making things have to be one way or another. Our lot sizes are very small. Our lot sizes are very oddly shaped. So to say that this cookie cutter model can fit into every configuration, I think is draconian. And I just don't know how we're going to achieve what we want to achieve by doing this. I just think we need to work harder on more of the affordability factor and the desirability of the city, and definitely encourage building of units that are more friendly to people with families.
I must say I agree with you.
I would say that in the first place, I don't consider these guidelines to be setting up luxury apartments. I don't think that that's what the guidelines are setting out. I think they're setting out some very reasonable criteria for family-friendly housing. I agree we have to deal with the affordability issue. We're all grappling with that. But I think that when you are building multifamily buildings, you're building something that's going to be here for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And if we get the greatest schools, and if we get everything that we want, and families are flocking to come here, they still are going to have these units to move into. So I really support these family-friendly design guidelines, and I think that they're worth going forward with, especially because they can be adopted while we're working out all of the magic formulas to have affordability to go with it. So I'd like to see it move.
And I agree. I don't have a lot to add other than to thank staff for all their hard work on this. And I personally, this is an issue that I really grapple with and really struggle with. It's, you know, what is family-friendly housing and what makes a unit family-friendly? And I sort of myself subscribe to the Potter Stewart definition of family-friendly housing. I know it when I see it. But you know, to define it is a challenge in its own right, and I think that we've done a fairly good job here, and I think it's important to remember that these are guidelines. So, you know, as I was just thinking about it, I mean, you know, we want something that walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, and this is, you know, we've sort of now created a instruction manual for how to create a duck. You know, it kind of walks like this, and it kind of sounds like this, and it's one of these several colors, and swims sometimes, and flies sometimes, and here you go. So I think that the guidelines are pretty good. I mean, yeah, like I said, it's important to remember they're not hard and fast rules. I think that's what we're going to discuss on May 2nd with the council, is what rules and regulations do we want to set up to work in tandem with these guidelines to attract family-friendly housing and affordable housing and other things that satisfy the goals of the city and work with these guidelines. But I think we do need to move ahead on these so that we have something to hold up as an example for the projects that are going to come before us in the near future, such as the couple projects that we'll be giving input on tonight. With that, I would entertain a motion if there aren't any other comments.
If I could, I just have another maybe more clarifying question. I don't know which person of the staff could answer this, but as Chair Moss says, he says that we're putting through all these guidelines, but I also heard the term regulations. So are there regulations in this resolution that we're passing, or are they all just guidelines?
The only regulation-related thing in the resolution is that the regulations would need to be amended to not require in-unit laundries for a bonus for family affordable housing, for family-friendly housing.
Well, with the understanding that we can go ahead and change these and add sections to them or tweak them as we are moving along in time here, I would move that we recommend approval of this to the City Council, along with the approval of the not having the laundry in unit necessary.
Is there any interest in adding something related to circulation and access, both visual and circulation-based access to courtyards and common spaces?
I'm sort of curious how you would how you would phrase that.
Yeah, something about efficient access via circulation from individual units to courtyards, and visual connection. I think there already is something about visual connection from units to courtyards, but maybe visual connection from circulation to courtyards as well.
That's all right with me.
You could make it a recommendation, I suppose, but
Yeah,
They're all just guidelines.
does the staff feel like if we went forward with that they have enough information to craft an additional guideline?
Could say, provide efficient access via circulation from units to courtyards and visual connections from circulation to courtyards. How's that?
From circulation to exteriors.
Exterior. Yes, not just the courtyard. Exterior spaces.
Does that sound good? Okay. And you're amenable to adding that?
Yes.
All right. Then I will second that motion.
Let's have a roll call. Commissioner Cardoza?
Aye.
Commissioner Donaldson?
Aye.
Commissioner Gunkel?
Aye.
Commissioner Keller?
I'm on the fence about either abstaining. I really think since these are just guidelines and we have the opportunity to talk it over with council at our May 2nd meeting, that in the spirit of cooperation, that I will vote yes on this.
Okay. Chair Moss?
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. And I also do think it's really worthwhile chatting with the folks that are living in the units and, doing some post-occupancy evaluations and following up on that.
We do have that planned.
Great.
All right. So with that,